Hey, I'm going to teach you how to make a simple basic 2D game with the moving sprite, collisions, and controls, all within a couple of minutes. So we're in our main Unity file. We're going to go into the hierarchy, go into 2D objects, sprite, and you can add a square. We're going to rename this to player. And in the player, for now we can have a white box, but we can drag in a picture, and I'll just use this example here. What we're going to do is we have a sprite renderer component. We're going to drag and drop the image in here. And now we have in our scene, we have this big image. I'm just going to decrease it down to here for now. What we're going to do now is add a rigid body 2D. What this does is give the player physics. And so here we have mass, linear drag, angular drag, and gravity scale. If you don't want the player to have any gravity, we can set this to 0, but the default is 1. If you want to increase it, you're more than welcome. What you're going to do is always freeze rotation, because this is a 2D project. We don't want the player to be moving in and out on its Z coordinate. Lastly, you're going to add a box collider 2D. This gives it its collider function, and here you can edit the collider, because clearly the collider is way bigger than our player. So here we can adjust it. So I'm just going to realign it to the size of the player. And now that we have our player, what we're going to do now is go into the same sprite, and we are now going to add some floors. For now, we could just keep it white. You can change the color here or add your own type of terrain. For now, we could also use tile sets and grid maps, but for now we're just going to keep a basic map of this, and we could rename this to ground. So now that we have our player and our map, we are now going to create a script. So you can go into your assets folder, go into create, and write C# script. We could rename this to player. I cannot spell. Player movement. And we're going to open this script. In this C# script is where all of our functions and code logic of our player is going to be. So here is the C# script of a player movement. So what I'm going to do is I have the basic code already outlined. What we're going to do now is here we declare two public float variables. We could have the move speed and the jump speed. You can change to 15, to 125, whatever you like it to. And then we have a private rigid body, RB variable. What we're going to do with this is we're going to get our rigid body that we created onto our player as a variable. And then we're going to make a private bool variable is grounded. So this will help us detect if our character is on the ground or not. In the void start function, what this function does is this starts at the beginning of the game and it runs one time. So in the very beginning, we're going to get our component rigid body 2D, which is going to be attached to the player, which will automatically get the rigid body. This only has to be done once and never again. In the update function, however, this is another built-in function within Unity that runs every single frame. So this is constantly running every single time. Here we create a float input, move input, and we have input.getAxis horizontal. What this does in Unity is we are able to detect left and right movement with A, D, and the left and right arrow keys. Here we're using our rigid body dot velocity, and we're going to create a new vector2 variable with move input times the speed. And what this does is with rigid body dot velocity dot y helps us make sure when we're in the sky jumping that when we go left and right, our movement speed is still the same to move speed and not according to any jump force. If input.get button down equals jump, which is spacebar, and your player is on the ground, what we're going to do now is we're going to take the rigid body and get the velocity on the X and times it by the jump force. And we're going to turn off this private bool variable to false to make sure the player is in the sky. Lastly, we have another built-in Unity function called void on collision enter 2D. This is what we're going to use to detect if a player is on the ground. If collision.gameObject.compare has the tag named ground, that means we are grounded. I will now show you how to add the tag ground onto your player objects. Now that we're back on the Unity engine, we're going to take the script and drag it onto the player's inspector page. And now we have these two spots here. We created two public floats so you can edit it here or within the code, but it's good practice to edit it within the inspector. Now we talked about the ground tag. This is what we need to add now. The final step is now to add a ground tag. Here I already have our ground tag written. However, if it's not there, you can add custom tags by clicking add tag and then add this plus, and you could write whatever you would like. Click save, come back here, and it should now appear. Right now this is untagged. We're going to add this to ground, and now this sprite is now a ground tag. So if our sprite touches this, it is now grounded. However, if it's not on the ground and it's in the air, then the isGrounded variable turns false. Final thing we forgot to add, within the ground empty object, we are now going to add a box collider 2D. This will now give it actual collisions with the player. So now when we start the game, the player is now going to fall, and we can actually move it with our left or right triggers, or A and D. Click spacebar and you can jump. And again, if you click back to the player object, we can now increase the movement speed in game as much as you like. Final step before we continue, we are now going to add the main camera onto the player, and we can readjust where the player is. You can actually readjust the camera by clicking one of these objects here. And now when we start the game, the main camera will follow the player at all times. So now you have a working camera, collisions, and 2D movements. That's it for this tutorial. If you guys want anything else specific, please let me know in the comments. If you guys want longer, shorter, or more specific videos, let me know.